8.
And 8, Chris, the topic we will be discussing today is, how do you incorporate the families and loved ones of PCs into your role-playing games?
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
Well, Andy, so I had something special for you I decided to save until we were on air. So this morning, my car got broken into.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this is a nice light intro.
You sound very cheery, but carry on.
Yeah, well, I'm cheery because it's a podcast, right? So, we're putting on airs, but also, nothing was really taken. Right? I think they got some change. It sounds like they actually hit a couple cars on the street.
Okay.
And I'm told that this is common, right? Like every once in a while, someone will go around and just try all the doors on the street.
Did they open the door or did they break a window?
Oh no, they opened the door because of course I didn't lock the door, right?
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things. Like we live on a safe street. Why would you lock the door? Although if you're the police, I totally had it locked, I guess. But, yeah, so they didn't. I mean, I think they rifled through. I'm really mad they didn't take any of our CDs. They just decided that we don't have good enough taste, I guess, to take the CDs, anything like that. Yeah, so some change and stuff. But the reason I bring it up on this podcast about tabletop games is I think stealing stuff is a hallmark of the game. You're always you have a rogue on your party. Just sort of a standard thing. That's the person who steals stuff for you. It's very interesting having that happen to you in real life because my first inclination was not oh, they got away with it. It was how dare they? Right?
Yes.
It's
yes.
Yeah. And if they had actually taken something of real value, I would get the street together. We'd go, marching down with pitchforks and torches, try to find the person who did it. Right. So on one hand, I think I kind of understand dragons now, right? Because these people come in and they steal all your stuff and try to leave. So of course you're gonna be mad about it. But yeah, but also just thinking about the ramifications of if you had this known adventuring party in your town where you knew that they were stealing stuff going around. You wouldn't let those people hang out, right? There would be, the whole police force of the town would be, getting together to, take down these criminals, this criminal element. But, oftentimes in our games, I think we laud these people as heroes, but really they're the lowest scum of the earth.
Yeah, we've touched on this a little bit in the past. The default D&D experience does kind of cast your adventures as sort of occupying a somewhat respected role in society of professional hero, professional problem solver. In reality, I mean, there's not a lot to distinguish you from this a band of ne'er-do-wells and ruffians rolling into town, right?
Yes.
Getting drunk and getting into a fight in the tavern and then breaking into somebody's room in the tavern to steal their gold. Everyone would know that while you were in town, trouble was just going to follow this group around. Yeah, so you're right. The city watch would be keeping an eye on them and
yeah, I mean, it almost makes me wonder if you leaned into that in your campaign a bit more. Anytime an adventuring party showed up in town, it's oh, whoa. We had some of you here before, just last month. Absolutely not. You just keep on going, or you can, hang out outside of town. If you have your business, just get it taken care of and get out of here. Whenever I have a situation in life I think is a very gameable moment, but it's on the opposite end of the fun part of the gaming moment. It's very, yeah, it's fun to sit there and kind of reflect. I mean, I think months and months ago, maybe even years ago at this point, I had cut myself and we talked about that a little bit on air. It's
yep.
And it just it hurts, right? I don't want that to happen again. And to think about someone slashing you with a sword and then your very next turn not using that to run away and cry somewhere is very, it's not true to life,
Getting robbed it's a very upsetting experience, and it doesn't sound like anything of huge value is taken from you, but it probably would be interesting if the next time the PCs just kind of on a whim steal some junk from somebody in town, what if that person is filled with rage and a desire for justice as a result of that violation, you know?
Or robbing, I don't know, I feel like this is a trope in D&D, you go into a somewhat sacred place and you you rifle through their altar and take,
Yeah.
take
Yes.
whatever holy symbol you can find, like holy relic you can find. I mean, if you did that, there's a very good chance that every acolyte of that in-game religion would be talking to each other and being like, yeah, they came and they took the thing. It's like, watch out for them. Like, there's gonna be a drawing of you passed around at every every church.
An adventuring
in the
party
area.
would be hired to track you down and get the stuff back.
Of course, yeah. In fact, yeah, like maybe they'd send their like high priest or whatever along with that adventuring party. So you've got a level 10 cleric who's very mad at you, trying to find you.
So I have a quick theft anecdote as well, by the way. Many years ago, I was traveling cross country with some friends, and while we were staying overnight, the car that had like most of my worldly possessions, this was in college, was stolen with all of my stuff. So like my clothes, all my stuff, and my entire CD collection at the time, of which I was very proud. And months later, the car was recovered and everything was gone, but my CDs were still there. And I can't tell you, a couple of 2-bit criminals like judged my collection of like Queensryche and Bon Jovi CDs and were like, this is garbage. This is not even worth keeping.
Oh, that's harsh. Was there any band where they were taken? Or it really just was like they flipped through it and like, nope, like I don't want any of this Megadeth.
Just remembering my musical taste in college, I don't think there were too many keepers in that collection. But
yeah.
So hey, I wanted to talk for a few minutes before we dive into our official topic. I wanted to kind of react a little bit to our last episode.
Oh yeah.
Because I took some ideas from our discussion in the last episode and I applied them to the one shot I ran, and I want to just briefly kind of describe what happened. So if you recall, in our last episode, both Chris and I talked a bit about the games we were kind of planning to run around Halloween. And I don't know if your game is done, but I ran just a one shot. It was a spooky Wild West one shot for a group of high schoolers. I had a couple quick things just I wanted to share. One is, if you recall, like I spent a good amount of time in that discussion I was angsting at the time about like how I wanted to let them experience the spread of situations that the Savage Worlds rules could cover. So I wanted some combat in there, I wanted some social stuff, and wanted some skill-based challenges. And I was struggling with how am I going to move players through the plot in like a limited amount of time and make sure. And after our discussion, you said something about when you ran one-shots, you typically ran them as like location-based. And after the discussion, I realized like I really was going about this the wrong way, and I was trying too hard to create a situation that probably would happen by itself if I just eased off a little bit. So instead of designing the adventure to be kind of a sequence of encounters that they would move through, I was like, no, scrap this. They're going to be in like a haunted ghost town. So I just had basically each building in the ghost town have a different kind of, something interesting in each building, some kind of encounter. And I just randomly determined the location of the buildings at the beginning of the adventure, and I just let them pick where they wanted to explore, and it worked out really well. So, and there was a story behind what was going on. Like there was a backstory you could figure out, and you could even solve it. But I realized in a short one shot that probably wasn't going to happen unless I forced it, and forcing it wasn't feeling right. So they picked up pieces of the backstory. They didn't put it all together, and that was fine.
Were they trying to figure out the backstory?
They were. So each kind of encounter had sort of a clue or a piece of what was really going on. But figuring out what was going on was not the main objective. The main objective was to rescue a kidnapped victim and to recover some stolen gold. So to the extent they figured out some of the town backstory, cool, but I decided not to try and make that the main focus, and that it worked well. So in our game, they explored about half of the locations. One of the things I like, and I remember doing this for a Numenera one shot a couple of years ago, is when you have an adventure where like they have to find a missing object or they have to confront a specific person. If it's location based, you can quietly as a GM just see where they go and put the object in their path,
Yes, yeah.
Rather than just hope that they pick the one building out of the 10 in the town that has the gold in it. I could just see what they were interested in exploring and make sure that the gold was somewhere where they might be able to find it. So that worked out pretty well. Anyway, sorry, I've been rambling on for a while, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple. So it sounds like you did you drop them like into the ghosts into the town and just describe different doors and let them go in, or did you drop them inside of one of your locations and then they got to choose from there?
In my original plan, they were going to have sort of like a prelude part where they would run into the bad guys and pursue them to the ghost town. But I decided to drop that, and I just said, You've been chasing these bad guys, and here you are. And I started them at the entrance of town. And it was a small town, so there's just like one main street, and on each side of the street, there's like 5 buildings. So I gave a cursory description of each building. They were drawn to some of them, and others didn't seem to interest them.
Yeah, there was like the fireworks factory and then like the library. That's super cool.
If this were a campaign, I wouldn't cheese it quite like this, but it's a one-shot, and I don't want the one-shot to end in total failure. So I just made sure that the key stuff was in the buildings that they chose,
Oh, that sounds super cool. All right, so then I have to ask, right? So you ran it for a bunch of high schoolers.
Yeah.
What was that experience like running? I would imagine, right, this is like a D&D club or like a role-playing game club.
Yep.
So that they know how to play games somewhat, but it's still, a handful of high schoolers. Like, was that scary? Did they just make fun of you the whole time? I don't know. Yeah, what do high schoolers do?
I've run a lot of games for younger kids, but with high schoolers, honestly, it was more challenging than I thought it might be. So there were 7 or 8 kids, which is quite a few. And my main takeaway is, like, in a lot of role-playing books, there's a section about, like, how to deal with, like, how to recognize and deal with different types of players. So there's, like, the different personalities of player at the table. And playing with adults, I haven't really found that to be terribly useful advice, because most adults, I mean, not to be little high schoolers, but most adults are kind of reasonable, and they have like reasonable and very similar expectations about the game you're all sitting down to play, right? Because you're all friends, you're all adults. But with high schoolers, I found that at the table, there really were a lot of very clearly different attitudes about what they wanted out of the game at the table.
Yeah.
There were some players that were kind of disruptive and clearly wanted something from the game that was different than the rest of the players. And there are players that were very quiet and obviously had something to contribute, but needed to have the attention turned deliberately on them to feel comfortable to participate. So being teenagers, they are these personalities to the extreme, right? Like it's...
Yes, yeah.
That was the most challenging element, was just juggling a lot of excited teenage personalities at the table. And yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just thinking about what I would have been like during that game as a teenager. And I mean, it's cringy, right? Like everybody thinks about like what they were like as a teenager and just wants to curl up into a ball and never think about that again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it just would have been like this mix of like excitement and also trying to impress everybody at the table. And like, like you have
absolutely.
all these thoughts kind of swirling around, like you as like an adjusted adult, like this is not that important, right? Like, like you're playing a game, you have other stuff going on in your day and stuff, but like like a teenager, like that could be like the highlight of the week or the month, so that it has to go perfectly.
Yeah, that's something that sank in partway through the game, is a couple of kids in particular, like, wow, they are really taking this seriously. Like, this is really important to them. And like, whether their character succeeds or fails is like a big deal to them. Whereas an adult just has less dramatic investment in what's happening. They have a little bit more ability to distance themselves. Like, oh, I fumbled. That's funny. Haha. But like, your teenager rolls and they roll a fumble and they really screw up and something bad happens. Like, that's kind of upsetting. And you can see that they're frustrated and upset. It was a really good bunch of kids, and I don't mean to disparage any of those personality types, but it was interesting having such a wide spread of personalities at the table. If it were an ongoing campaign, it would inevitably lead to like some kind of taking a couple of people aside and kind of just establishing what do you want out of this, and is the way you're playing the best way for all of us to have fun, but it was a one shot, so we didn't have to get into that.
Yeah, so I am running. I'm not done with it yet. So I'm this one shot that I'm doing is based in the Curse of Strahd.
Yeah,
they're inside Castle Ravenloft. So it's a one shot titled Strahd Must Die Tonight, and the whole concept behind it, right, is that you play for like 4 actual hours, real world hours in the game. And at the end of every hour, Strahd shows up to kind of toy with you a little bit and then disappears. And then after 4 hours, he's going to fight you no matter what. Right. So they're going into Castle Ravenloft and they have 4 hours to explore to try to find there's an NPC that's in there that they're trying to find. And then a couple of like artifacts that they know about that they can use to help their fight against Strahd. Like there's some stuff set up there. If they just sit around and sort of like wait those 4 hours, it's not going to go well for them.
Yeah.
Right. So like there's incentive for them to actually push through. And the first session went really well. And it was the first time I'd run D&D in person in 2 years, I think.
Wow. That's fantastic.
But it was really good. Like I was super nervous because Castle Ravenloft, it's just a gigantic place, right? There are too many rooms for you to appropriately prep. Like there's too much going on inside that castle for you to really get your mind around for something like a one shot. If I was running a long campaign, like I would take probably a month to prep it, right? And like really get it down and really figure out like how I'm going to do it and stuff. But so instead I had like a week or two because I'm a procrastinator. But so I like got like a rough idea of what I wanted to do. And the 2 things I was most nervous about were nailing my Strahd accent. That one kept me up at night. And then
can we get a line in Strahd's voice?
And, I mean, I gotta I spent like a half an hour before the game like trying to talk. So let me see if I can do it. It's like Andy, welcome to the castle.
Okay, that's perfect. Yeah,
it's just very subtle. Because you don't want to go too much, because then you end up like I mentioned, you end up either like Nandor from What We Do in the Shadows, or you end up like Dracula. So
yes,
I was worried about that, and that went fine. That was good. And then the other thing I was worried about was the actual mapping of the castle, because like unlike say a pretty flat 2-dimensional dungeon, this is like a 50-room dungeon that spans 7 or 8 floors. Yeah, and so I was like, how am I going to map this if they decide to just speed run through some of these rooms? You know, like if they're just going to run up the tower and go down to the basement and like, do all this stuff. But it ended up not really mattering because like as soon as they stepped inside the dungeon, like all my notes went out the window because it was just like we started drawing on the paper, like drawing the map of the castle and stuff. And it was like, okay, well, this no longer looks like the map that I'm looking at in the book. So let's just put that aside and we'll just play this. Play this how we're going to play it. And that ended up being a pretty good tactic. So like I was roughly following how they were going through the castle, if that makes sense, and not worrying so much about getting all the turns correct. And stuff, but they they've hit a lot of neat stuff in it. There's been some really fun moments. I'll describe one in just a little bit, but then they've been having a lot of fun with it. We ended on a big kind of climactic battle, found one of the artifacts, and then the next time that we meet, probably in a week or two, we'll pick up from there, and hopefully they'll be able to kill Strahd that night.
Playing it as a one shot is kind of nice because they're not going to revisit this location. If they're not really going to be doing a lot of backtracking and stuff like that, you don't really have to care too much about keeping the map straight, right? Like, if you were doing this a multi-month campaign and they were making repeated expeditions into the castle and you would have to really solidify the architecture from session to session, that might be a problem. But like for a one shot, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, if you're never going to play Curse of Strahd or you've played it before and you want to look it up, there's a ton of really cool projects that people have done to make 3-dimensional versions of the castle. I mean, it's just like people have done these models where you just like lay each floor on top of each other, so you have this huge stack of stuff, and then everything is modeled inside too with all the different chairs and tables and stuff, and that's really cool, and that is not my style of running a game at all. So it's like I can appreciate that, but then I also appreciate that they just see like we'll just sort of draw it out as we're going, and hopefully it makes sense if you need to ever think about it again. So my favorite moment from it, there is a room inside, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but if you're like really nervous about that, skip ahead a couple minutes. But there's a room that has a bunch of mirrors inside of the castle, and it's sort of like it's somewhat of a secret room. They found the opening into this room, so it's a dark room that's full of mirrors. One of the players decided to cast light on a coin and flip the coin into the room, just like around the corner, because they didn't want to, go in there and, face some surprise monster or something like that. So they flip a coin inside this room with a bunch of mirrors. So I just described it as this light bouncing everywhere, right? Like it's bouncing off all the mirrors and stuff. Like, well, that's weird. And then they sent a familiar in. The familiar went in there. It's a bat familiar. And then it saw a bunch of bats everywhere, right? It's like, so they're trying to figure out, like, what is going on with this room. And it was just one of those moments at the table where you're like, this is so fun. I know what that room is, and I'm describing it straight to them. And they keep on trying stuff. And it's like, none of this makes sense until you step inside the room.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just like one of those like magical moments, I think, of like, gameplay and story and stuff all coming together, that I just like love this hobby for, right? Like you just say these ridiculous things and it's like, but I'm being honest to what would happen if you did this, I'm not trying to pull a fast one on you or anything.
A couple episodes ago, both of us were a little bit in the doldrums. We were talking about like imposter syndrome and both feeling a little bit blah. And I think both of us had the experience, and I just heard you describe it, of at the table just being reminded how fun this hobby is and how fun it can just be to run or to play a game, when it's going right. I definitely had that experience with the one shot, and it sounds like Strahd had some really just genuinely enjoyable moments for you.
Yeah, it is fun. It's like, once I got past the nerves and all, it's like, oh yeah, I'm like playing a game with friends. This is, really amazing to get to do this. For me, it's been hard to not run games in person. Like I've gotten to play some games in person, and that's been really good. Like running something, going through the prep and like getting it all ready, scheduling, get everybody at the table, and like, and then you have that moment where you switch from chit chat to like, now we're running the game. It's such a unique experience to get to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then like the first time that you have to, actually say your silly Dracula line out loud to your friends, it's like, okay, we're going to try it. Let's see how it goes.
So, hey, let's dive into our topic, shall we?
Yeah.
The topic we rolled is an interesting one. I think it's been on the table for quite a while. How do you incorporate families and loved ones of PCs into your games? And let me start this one out, as I often do, by thinking back to the days of old when I was younger. And I want to explain my main experience with incorporating families and loved ones into a game. The first time that I even gave any thought to the PCs having loved ones or a family was when I and my high school friends were playing the top secret SI role-playing game. And like a lot of role-playing games, when you create your character, you buy advantages for them, and you can get points to buy advantages by taking some disadvantages. And as you'll find in a lot of role-playing games, one commonly taken disadvantage is to have a dependent or basically a loved one. And by buying that disadvantage, you are signaling to the GM, from a gameplay perspective, this is a point of vulnerability for my character that can be used against me. It's going to disadvantage my character that I have a wife or a kid or an elderly grandma I have to take care of. There's countless RPGs in which you'll find that basic setup. If you are going to involve family or friends, it's as explicitly a liability for your character. It evokes to me a lot of like the way that loved ones are used in like superhero comics, like Aunt May is there mostly that Green Goblin can like periodically threaten to, kidnap her or something like that, right? That has been, for me, the main way that families and stuff like that have been incorporated into the game as something, I'm not like ruthless or stupid about it, but as a GM, when someone says, I have a grandma that I have to take care of, my GM mind is like, how can that get the player into trouble? These days, I would say, how can that create some like drama and tension and stakes? You didn't play role-playing games back in the days of yore when that was the standard way that dependents and loved ones are presented. How does that strike you?
Yeah, it strikes me as very much like a in-genre sort of thing back in the 80s and 90s, because that sort of like self-made white man like mentality of like, I'm at my best when I am fully divorced from this world and all the trappings of it, right? Like that was sort of the power fantasy back then. And like now, I mean, that's just like so destructive, right? It's like so awful to me to think about it. But I immediately started thinking about, have you seen, there's two movies that I've watched recently. Onward, that Pixar movie.
Okay.
From
I have not
like a
seen
couple
it.
years ago. I mean, you should, right? Like if you like Pixar movies at all, like it's like their D&D movie, right? Like it's all about like these kids going on an adventure and stuff. There's a mom character in that who ends up being very crucial throughout as part of like the actual adventure in it. So she's sort of chasing her kids as they're going on this adventure, and she has her own little quests and stuff that she's doing, and then, you know, like she's part of the epic final battle and stuff. And like to me, like that's a really powerful example of like how those connections can be inside of a game, inside of a story. You know, she's not a passive individual where it's like, you know, the story is immediately putting her in prison or something, and the boys have to go save her, you know, something like that. She's an active participant, right? Like, so that's the switch to it, is like, okay, like, so hey, you have a grandma there who has all sorts of connections, right? Like because she's old, so maybe she knows a bunch of people that the players could communicate with. You know, maybe she has like funds that she could give the players, you know, like there's all these like positive things to that too. I think that like, but if you always like, but casting it as just like, you have this dependent off in a home somewhere that you have to make sure that you're taking care of, right? It's like two sides of the same coin, right? Like you could approach it in both ways, I think, and like have it be somewhat true, but like, again, people are complex, right? So like maybe it is there's a dependent, but then you also have the like the resources part of it too.
Yeah.
Going back to your gaming days of yore, did you ever treat like that family member as a potential resource or positive thing, or was it always just like leaning on the extra danger?
I'm always leaning on the extra danger, I think. You know, because I mean, in my youth, I mean, that was the way it was presented in the rules. Like, this is a weakness. This isn't something that should wind up being an advantage for your player. Because they took this weakness, they are a ambidextrous ninja with, you know, because they took this weakness, they now have a plus 25 sniping skill. So, you know, you can't. One thing that comics do, that better comics do, is they married. Is it Mary? Who's Spider-Man's like girlfriend?
Mary Jane.
That's right.
You're just like
yeah.
So I'm sure some people are just screaming at their podcast player now that.
So it's boring when Dr. Octopus kidnaps Mary Jane and Spider-Man has to go rescue Mary Jane. I mean, that's lazy and boring, right? It's interesting when Spider-Man's, you know, life of crime fighting creates conflict or drama with Mary Jane. Or she finds out who he is, or she comes to an incorrect conclusion about him because of the demands of his superhero life, right? And I wonder if I were to play a game where, you know, a dependent or family was involved, I think I would look for more ways to have that person react and become entangled with the player's life in ways that create drama, rather than just use them as a cheesy kidnap plot.
Yeah, there's a ton you can do. And I mean, I like what you said there about like the mistaken identity, like, you know, like, or uncovering, uncovering who, you know, Peter Parker actually is. Like, I mean, it's a hallmark of comics. I don't know exactly how you do that in a game, but I like the thought of, hey, this person has a secret about you, and, you know, like, you can't stop them from telling that. And like, again, if they have motivations of their own, maybe they have a reason to share. The other movie that I was thinking about, Mitchells versus the Machines, it's a really good family movie. Like, you know, especially if you're like you're a dad, like it's a good family movie to watch. Like, you know, really good animation and stuff. The adventuring party in that is like a family unit, right? So it's like a nuclear family. There's a mom, a dad, and daughter, and a son. And it's like, watching that movie is really fun because you get to see like their relationship dynamic, and you have all this like built up drama and tension and stories and stuff in between them. But then they're also like all good at their own thing too, and they have to like work together and use those skills. Part of me wonders like how fun it would be to run a game where you're playing a family like together. Yeah, like you are playing all like your loved ones.
That could be really neat. There's another way I've seen family used in role-playing games. I haven't really done this as much. Certain games like Call of Cthulhu, if you have a game where there's a possibility the PC will die or be taken out in some way, and you don't want to have the whole campaign just come crashing to a halt, like if you've invested a year into a Call of Cthulhu campaign and you don't want it to just peter out because somebody got killed by a cultist, right? So there's the suggestion I've seen that families and friends are obvious like replacements for PCs to step into. If your PC dies or is taken out, the family or friend follows and picks up the trail where you left off, I guess. There's definitely a kind of certain artificiality about that. I mean, it's a game mechanic for just having a replacement PC that makes a little bit of sense to step in, right? But I've always liked the idea, and I wish I could remember what game this was, but that in order for that to happen, you had to have been reporting to that character what's been going on.
Oh,
nice. Keeping them appraised. I really like the idea of having a player describe what their friends and family know about what they do, and how the player like talks to them about what they're doing. You know, do you have a weekly letter where you just diary style write out what you've been up to? You know, do you? How would you need to involve your friend or family member in order for them to be able to step up and take your place if you get knocked out?
Yeah.
To me, that's a neat idea. I forget what game system it is. I think it might be something weird like Hackmaster or something, like something you wouldn't think, where the experience level that PC has when they step into the game depends on how good a job you've been doing reporting what you've been doing.
That's fascinating. So the Eternal Lies game that I played in that finished up, so we also played Trail of Nyarlathotep as well. So the characters from that Trail game ended up showing up in Eternal Lies, and in fact, I think just one of the players actually played the nephew of his character from from the previous game too, right? So like it was fun for like us. Like this is gonna sound a little hokey, but like we had loved ones from that other game because like there were these characters that we loved as you know, people who played with these characters a bunch. And then in the Eternal Lies game, like they would show up every once in a while, and like especially since, you know, they were related, and like we sort of like some of our characters knew those characters too. It added this extra layer, I think, to that, where it was like, oh my goodness, like they're here, like that sort of thing, like that, like Cheers effect almost of like, yeah, Norm, you know.
They kind of create this continuity to the setting. They break in a good way the illusion that the whole world ends outside your PC's line of sight.
Yeah, I think so. Like something you just said there, I think is super important. I mean, having loved ones for the PCs, I think grounds what they're doing quite a bit for them. So like the one strong example I have of this was, you know, one of a rogue in a D&D campaign that I ran had a nephew character that popped up every once in a while, and like who like adored her and like wanted to know everything about like what was going on, you know, and like this was like someone to protect and stuff. And like having those moments, a little tough to role play that, you know, a bit, but it was also like it was really fun having that touch point of like, you know, this is like you're going off and doing these adventures, but then you're sending money back to this like this person. You can go talk to them too, right? Like, and update them on what's going on, and they care about you and want to know, and like they're not going to be able to step into your shoes. They might want to, but having that I think is a good grounding effect, because otherwise then it can turn a little bit into like, well, we're heroes, we're untouchable, we roll through, we just, you know, do what we're gonna do, kill some dragons and stuff, but like having a reason why is helpful.
It feels very natural to have like loved ones and families in like more modern genre games like Call of Cthulhu, Trail of Cthulhu, and also like superhero type things where loved ones as, you know, vulnerabilities are really common. But I'm curious, you know, do you see people creating for themselves families and loved ones in like D&D fantasy? Is that something that's common at your table? You just mentioned that it has happened at least with one of your characters. Is that a thing people think about?
I think so. It might be a function of how like D&D modules are written now, that like there's a lot of that sort of built in. I think like there's suggestions about having family members. I mean, like to me it's just sort of like that's part of reality in the real world. So of course it should show up in games too.
Yeah.
I think for me, it would change things if it was explicitly sort of like not encouraged. Then to me, that signals like, okay, this is going to be a really crunchy game with a lot of combat, and like not a lot of role playing. Yeah. If we're kind of explicitly not told to have these bonds, have these people, special people in our lives and stuff. Yeah, and like, especially if I was playing a game nowadays and they're like, okay, you can take this disadvantage of having a kid at home. I'd be like, what? Wait, no, I have kids at home. Like, that's not a disadvantage, is it? There'd be some amount of like of how galling that you would do that.
I mean, the literary genres that feed D&D tend to give us characters and heroes that are disconnected from their families and societies, right? And I mean, there's some obvious ones like the Elrics, who are just total loners with no, connections, or the Conans. But, even people that aren't quite that extreme, if they're out adventuring across Middle Earth, they are weird. They've like stepped outside their communities. They've left their families behind in some way, shape, or form, or maybe they've been cast out, or they can't go back home, or they've lost their family. Because that creates such easy, character drama and tension to have them be outcasts or to have suffered, the loss of family and stuff like that. That's such a common thing in fantasy in general. I do think it is kind of neat to hear about players in D&D today going, hey, it really wouldn't make sense for my character not to have a mom and dad and maybe a brother who lives in this town over here. And that's really exciting. I think it makes total sense, but I do think it is pushing back a little bit against like some very long-standing genre tendencies.
Yeah, it's, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about Lord of the Rings because I'm always thinking about Lord of the Rings, but like yeah, as Frodo doesn't get to like ever come back, right? Like he leaves, he never gets to come back, but he gets to visit Bilbo on the way, right?
Yep.
Like he gets to see Bilbo that one last time, and that's sort of like the first milestone for him is like getting to there, right? Like getting to see Bilbo, that one last time. Whereas like Sam does get to go back to the Shire, and like he is, I'm going to say like he's sort of like largely unchanged other than like his memories and stuff from that. Like unlike Merry and Pippin, like, right, he didn't grow taller and stuff. Like, yeah,
right.
Like Sam he did this whole thing. He never wanted to do any part of it. He just wanted to get back and marry Rosie and like live a nice quiet life. Right. And like, I think like a modern gamer would probably look at Sam and be like, that's who I want to be. And I think maybe like an older school gamer might look at like Frodo and be like, that's who I want to be. And then I'm not sure who looks at Aragorn and says I want to be that, but like, there's some personality type that wants that too, that like loner who ends up being the king, right? Like, so but I think like that Sam character to me is like the archetype of, I think, what a lot of people are looking for in their D&D game is like this big adventure, but then coming back home.
Well, awesome. Well, I think that we should wrap it up there, unless you had any closing comments that we haven't already touched on.
No, I think that was pretty good. I feel like I made a good point about Lord of the Rings, and that always makes me happy. So
it's always good when we can bring up Lord of the Rings, which, as you say, I do think about pretty much all the time. Like, so, like Dune temporarily replaced it for like a week this fall, but that was about it. But then it was back to just thinking about Lord of the Rings all the time. So
yes,
fair enough. Okay, well, all right, Chris, any closing items we need to cover here?
Yeah, I think I want to allude to something, although we don't have any strong plans yet. We're going to do something special for the holidays again. We're not 100% sure what that is. If you have ideas on what you want that to be, I guess let me know. But I've got a big list of stuff, and I think we'll pull some of our friends and former guests and stuff and see what they're excited about. But I'm looking forward to it. We tend to do something special every holiday season, and I don't think this one will disappoint. So get hyped, I guess, is my parting thought there.
Oh, that's good. I'm excited to talk with you and with some of our former guests and stuff more about what that will be, because it is always a fun time whatever we do. I wanted to say one real quick thing. You and I don't publish or write games in the gaming industry or whatever, but we have a couple of former guests that are definitely involved, and I just wanted to do a shout out because Kyle Latino, a frequent guest and friend of the show, he has done a number of projects for prominent games recently, and like one of them I just saw in the bookstore, Flames of Freedom, has some of Kyle's amazing maps in it. So I just wanted to just do a quick shout out, like if you're looking for some cool maps, go check out Flames of Freedom.
I think he has, and I'm not sure like what is publicly announced and stuff, but yeah, he has a lot of cool work upcoming that I'm super excited about in like systems I wouldn't normally look at too. So I feel like this is a hallmark of like a good artist, is like you see their art and you're like, oh, maybe I do want to pick up that book, and like that. So yeah, we obviously love Kyle. Oh, and then the other thing, actually, another like tangentially related to Roll for Topic stuff, there's a Mothership Kickstarter going on right now that I've been trying to resist, but I don't know how much longer I'm able to resist it. They're doing a cool box set.
Yeah, it looks fantastic.
Yeah, this has been your go buy stuff corner, I guess.
All right, well, hey, let's wrap it up here, Chris. You want to close us out here?
Oh, yeah. I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.